Hey, good morning, good evening, or afternoon, wherever you're from. I'm Rod Hutchings, coming from Melbourne, Australia, and it's just near midnight for me. So welcome to our panel discussion today about making remote work work, designing strategies and tactics for belonging and inclusion in the hybrid remote workplace. And, as we navigate outside of this COVID period, and even before that, lots of people work remotely, and a real key thing is around getting a sense of belonging and inclusion, whether your team's working remotely, in person, and then these hybrid models. So there's continual challenges. So I'm really excited about today's conversation, and really looking forward to it. So we've got a great panel of experts who are going to share their insights and experiences on thriving and inclusive environments. So let's dive into the discussion and bring forward the panelists, please. Hello, and welcome back. Many of you, I think, have been on panels with most of the team today, which is really great. And as I said, really looking forward to our conversation. And so we'll just start off with some introductions. If you want to just go around our virtual room, we'll go around clockwise. Alex first, who's probably closest to me, actually, physically as well. But and maybe as you introduce yourself, Alex, just give us a little insight to your experience with remote working as well. So over to you, Alex. Thank you.
Kia ora, good morning. I'm Alex Howison. I work at Sky TV in New Zealand, so it's 2 o'clock in the morning here. It's fantastic to be here. Thank you very much for having me. We have remote workforces in both the Philippines as well as in India. So they're the two parts of my most recent experience of managing workforces overseas. But originally from Australia, I've worked with remote workforces for a very, very long time. In fact, that has been most of my experience. And all the things from time zones, which is why this type of thing doesn't bother me, but all the way through to making sure that from a cultural perspective, all of the needs and wishes of people are wanted all over the world. So I'm really excited to be here. I can't wait to hear from all the other panelists. Thanks, Rod.
Thanks, Alex, and welcome, Nessa.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nessa Johnson. I am based out of the Los Angeles, US area, 7 a.m. my time. I always thought that was early until I got on a panel with Alex and Rod. So I don't know if Rod is very early or very late, but I've been working full-time remote since the pandemic. But before that, I was actually in a couple of different roles where I was part-time remote probably for 6 years. So going into the pandemic, I already had some experience with remote work, but only in that part-time capacity, and making that switch to full-time was definitely a change and something to get adjusted to. I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you. And next one, how do I say your name? Is it Soundara?
Yeah, it's Soundari. Hi, Rod. Good to see you again. Hi, Khalil. Some familiar faces, and lovely to meet up with you, Alex, Nessa, and Noel. Really nice. I'm in Hong Kong, so normally I'm on the US panels. I'm the one who's saying 1 a.m., 2 a.m. Of course, can't beat the New Zealand, Australia. First to sunrise in the new year, and obviously late in the night now. I've been working remote, feels like all my life, but clearly not. Just time warped on that. I think really Singapore, which is my near neighbor, announced in April about really looking at 4-day work weeks, looking at government getting involved in regulating some of these opportunities for flexible work hours starting from December this year. And Hong Kong, I know, is not ready for it yet. But it's very interesting to see different parts of the world getting involved very differently in this conversation. And like Alex, you with your team in Philippines and India, and you sitting in New Zealand, it's always complicated. It's like a relationship status in that sense. So I think really figuring these out across the borders and seeing what works for each, not just a country, but each organization and each team, going micro in that. And that's the real exciting part. I work with leaders and teams to help them move to action using business storytelling. So I'm looking to collect a lot of stories today.
Thank you. And next.
I think it's me.
Yes, thanks.
All right. So hi, morning, afternoon, evening for I guess a lot of you. My name is Noelle Peart. I'm the Vice President of Learning and Inclusion in Exos. And from, we think about remote workforce, similar to Nessa, of course, since COVID, have been in this space working remotely. And that was in a retail organization at Best Buy, and now my current organization, which is Health and Wellness. So I have a very interesting perspective. We can talk about how you build community and create, ensure that there's inclusion in a remote space. And then, of course, prior to that, I did some remote work as well, just part-time in an HR capacity. So it's really interesting that the world, as we've shifted that way, but how do you create space where you're connecting people? And I'm in Frisco, Texas. So here it's 9 o'clock in the morning. So again,
Very pleasant.
very different than the rest of the
I'm very jealous. Thank you.
No problem.
And last but not least.
Yes, my name is Khalil, HR and management consultant, author of the book Future Work Simplified. Most of my work is in Middle East, Dubai and Saudi Arabia, but right now I'm in Pakistan, Islamabad. We are in the middle of a heat wave. So you can understand what the mind is right now. My input, I think, would be based around the cultural aspects and the geographic region, because it varies from place to place. And the last thing, COVID accelerated all these discussions. Although the experts had been discussing it since 2010, 2012, like there should be proper, remote workplace diversity and inclusion. But COVID sometime, I thought as a blessing in disguise that it accelerated everything. But it also brought, some sort of problems, because we didn't have any sort of a manual, any sort of distinguishing factor what's right and wrong. So it's a trial and error, but we are learning. So excited to be part of such a diverse and great panel.
Thank you. And I thought, just to extend our introduction, I'll ask another sort of intro type question. And everyone can have a go at this if they like, is really what, if you just can share, how's your current work situation in the remote context? So let's sort of try and ground, where are we today, at least in our panel, about working in a remote type hybrid situation. So if I'll start, maybe I'll just start back with you, Alex. You want to just, how is it currently in your workplace?
Currently, we have two workforces, quite a significant call center, part of our call center operation up in Manila in the Philippines, and then also over in India for some of our content programming, as well as technology areas such as development. But also operating in New Zealand as a whole, we've got remote working across the country. So people who are not based in the office environment, our head office is all in Auckland. And what we have done is, I suppose, treated them exactly the same. So when we are looking at the work that's being done overseas and our people that manage workforces from New Zealand, obviously we've got a really strange time zone. So it's not that good in a lot of times, mostly overnight in terms of the work. So our major problem there is wellbeing and making sure we've got people who are not trying to do two jobs at once. So have a full workforce in the middle of the day, but in New Zealand, but then a full workforce running overnight as well. So it's trying to look at some of that concept of shift working. But on the flip side also is the workforces that we have that are spread across the country, so where they might come in only once a month, and they're not necessarily that dissimilar from a perspective of touch points being in person. So and making, we've got a new push here in New Zealand of bringing everyone back to work 3 days a week, because that's how you get higher productivity. That's actually really difficult to manage when people aren't here. So we're in that type of situation at the moment, still feeling our way, I suppose.
And I'll just dig a bit deeper. Like, how, for you personally, has it changed today, how you're working in that environment to how you were working, 5-10 years ago? Is that, what's your personal circumstance in that
No,
remote work?
not so much. I think what is fantastic about today's environment from before is that you couldn't see someone before. You weren't with this type of technology, so you weren't able to look at and pick up visual cues of someone's, well-being, their circumstance, looking at where you think that they're at on a continuum of engagement, for example. I think what's great now is sort of same rules apply in terms of making sure that everybody has a voice and being really deliberate about that. But now you can see them. So one of my little hints and tips is making sure cameras are on, and if they're off, you know why they are.
Yeah, no, that's really good. So you're going to bring quite a bit of depth to the conversation. So thank you. Who else wants to share how their sort of similar answer or their circumstance? Anyone can have a go.
Yes, I think few years back, not 10 or 15 years, just a couple of years back, remote work was all around. Let's suppose if there is an inclement weather, too much rain, or too much heat. Let's say, take the example of the Middle East, and then we used to had, okay, now you can work from home because there is some sort of a situation outside. But now for the past couple of years, the entire definition of remote work and working from home has changed. So a few days back, there was a company, a huge multinational, which wanted to have some new policies based on their operations within Pakistan and India. And now they are trying to come up with policies related to maternity leaves, paternity leaves, or let's suppose people who are having some sort of special days. So the work from home concept, the entire definition has changed in just a few years. So the pace of change has been very fast, but the research that is required in order to cope with it, unfortunately, it's not in line with it. We need to understand like where the technology is. There is a huge difference between what is going on in Europe right now as compared to what is going on in South Asia. So we need to first understand the dynamics and then start working on implementing the workforce over here.
But how about, sorry, and I'll just come back to personally your work circumstance. So how are you working personally at home most of the time? Like, can you just share a bit
I
about
think
that?
this is the toughest question to answer.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yes. See, working with US clients now, there is a a time zone difference. So that's one of the some people call it a minor challenge, but actually it is a major challenge. The other thing is talking to people. You need to be culturally aware of the usage of the word. So we need to learn new things. So most of my clients are in Middle East, and if there is a woman HR manager, you need to be very clear what sort of language or words you need to use, because let's suppose the Arabs are very particular when it comes to usage of the language and how you see and how you watch. So it's a learning curve for everyone. So what we do, what others do. So I think the understanding of the culture, the usage of the words is extremely important when you are working on managing remote work as a manager, and all the audience listening. They need to understand technology just a medium of remote work. They need to understand what the culture are and what sort of communication they should use as well.
Thank you.
I'll go next.
Yes, please.
So I failed to mention my role. So today I lead the people function of a company called GCI Health. We're a healthcare communications agency. So speaking to Khalil's point, we're very focused on like how we communicate and word choice, etc. So I'll talk a little bit about how our team works today. We're global, and so when we have teams assigned to accounts, they could be either a US based account where we have people from all different time zones based in the US working on an account, or it could be a global account where we have people working across time zones, etc. And yet, servicing the client, making sure that we're meeting all their deliverables remains really important. So having that coordination on deliverables and being really explicit on who's got what task and timelines has really helped out the team here. As for my personal work experience, I was just reflecting as the panel was speaking that before the pandemic, for me, remote work was the occasional thing sprinkled into a week of typically going into the office. And now it's actually the opposite. And I never really thought about that. But today I have the option to be able to go into a local office. I typically go about once every 2 weeks just to connect with our employees there. But a lot of what I do, and especially as a people leader, can be accomplished remotely. And I think that that's been a surprise for me personally.
No, that's really, again, interesting. And that's probably my experience as well. Who else wants to share?
I can go. Similar to Nessa in this space. So I personally, work from home, but my organization, we're a company of coaches. So our coaches are with clients in the field. So they may have, a few hours of remote work when they're, prepping for a client, or they may have, they're doing virtual training that way. But for the most part, our corporate teams are remote. We do have an office in Phoenix, Arizona. We have space in New Jersey, as an office in New York. So with those spaces, we try to make sure when people come into the office, right, that we make sure it's impactful. And it's not just that I'm in the office and then I'm going to be in front of my computer all day, because then you miss the connection, right? That's what you're talking about. You're missing that piece. So when people do go in, we're very intentional in terms of, events, right? How do we make sure that there's a speaker series that day, or a lunch and learn, or things of that nature where people can get together? We've even changed the format and the layout, of those spaces to make sure that it is a true environment where people can collaborate and connect, versus I'm just going to go over here in my cubicle, right? It might as well be at home, right? Because that's what you hear right now. People are like, why am I going to the office if it's going to be the same exact thing in my house? And I think that's really important. If you're going to say, hey, you're a hybrid workforce, make sure that it's the hybrid piece. And it's not just that I'm physically, in the office, but connecting with people on the computer. And I think that's really important when you're trying to build strategies and be intentional. And I think that's, part of our conversation this morning or evening.
Yes. No, and you bring up some great points, and that's certainly my experience. Where at like my organization, we had a lot of the teams again were spread around the world, and so sometimes you'd go into work and you're just on your computer talking to people in other locations. So you do wonder why did I sort of transit to get to work for an hour? Not really sure, but thanks. Last one.
So, just as I'm a solopreneur, so a totally different context from an organizational context, but I have my clients and my collaborators across the world now. Earlier times, it was all pretty local in terms of the work that I did. I did have the occasional collaborator who was outside, but a lot of my clients are now distributed. So I think the initial piece, especially because I work with a lot of clients on strategy communication, so it's all about getting people aligned and motivated to work together, be it bottom up, top down, sideways, whatever it is. So it's really then clear communication and a lot of frank dialoguing, both in terms of the conversation with the clients and with the clients' teams. So some of the stuff is like you do it in person. So I travel out. So I travel a lot more than I used to earlier, which is great because you can travel now. But it also means that the initial rapport building, initial conversations are all still pretty personal. And then you're able to go back and do it in a very distributed fashion, because even the clients' teams are distributed. And for them, instead of the struggle of trying to get everybody together or doing earlier, just for example, for a strategy workshop, it used to be 2 days, everybody stops everything, or at least tries to look at the phone underneath the table kind of thing. Now they can do it in micro segments across a week, 2 weeks, and it can still not impact work. So I think that distributed nature of people and distributed nature of work has really opened a lot of opportunity work-wise for sure. And I'm sure we'll talk a lot more about synchronous, asynchronous as we go along.
Yeah, that's really interesting, that how it would open up opportunities where, like, thinking virtually is sort of just seems, it's become so normal. And I thought the other point you made around the, needing to be intentional around where your customer are. Like for me 10 years ago, I would just always think, well, if I've got a meeting with the customer, they're going to be at their physical work location. I can just rock up there, but you can't make, I can't make those assumptions today either, because customers, people can be working from anywhere. So we'll move on from that, but thank you. So I guess what I wanted to illustrate there is just what a rich lot of experience we've got on the panel here about different ways of working as we talk. And we've already spent 20 minutes so far, but hopefully it's framed as well for the conversation to come. So the conversation today is about, a big part is it about connection. So I'll come back to Alex again, and I'm just wondering, how can leaders create connections then between people to feel like they really belong? So belonging is really important, so they belong to the team and with each other when we've got this sort of remote hybrid way of working. What are your thoughts on that, Alex?
I think what I found most successful is actually having a proper framework and applying that consistently on however long basis. So the way that we operate is, or the way that I operate is, have a Monday meeting, a Wednesday, Friday check-in, making sure there are different times of the day, utilizing technology such as your calendar to show when you're in and out of office, making sure people are understanding that if you're working from, say, 10 a.m. or later on, or 11 a.m. later on because you're picking up a night time, that and I won't be looking at emails at that, outside of these times, making sure that you've got that team agreement as well, so you can manage people's well-being instead of always being on, and having that fairness. I think having even within the meetings, have a good structure, so ensuring that you start the meeting all the time on a check-in. How is everybody? Go around the room, make sure everybody's got a voice and having something to say. But I think as a leader, it is your responsibility to pick up nuance. I think in a situation where you're just online, for example, not sort of calling out or shaming in the moment if someone doesn't have their camera on. You've already set the expectation, so if they don't have a camera on, that's picking that conversation up one-on-one quickly. Is everything going all right? Because let's have a conversation, but also ensuring that you have that built into your own diary, so you're not going sort of bang, 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 bang all the way through in meetings, so people know where to that you're available, and making sure that they know that you're available and at what time. So I think having that rhythm as a team is probably where I've found the most success.
I want to jump in.
Yeah, go. No, you go.
I was going to say, I loved everything Alex said, and that's some of the work that we do here. We call it our readiness culture code. And with that, you're exactly what you're saying. It's a playbook, right? Like, how do we be clear on creating that space? And to double click into it a step further, some of the practices you named, we do, but we also make sure, as I mentioned before, about being intentional. So like Wednesdays is one of those team Wednesdays. How do you find ways to get people together virtually, and then of course in person? But some of that's even like on our intranet, our called Work Vivo, we have a series called Let's Talk About It, right? And it's a prompt that comes up the first and third Wednesday of the month. And some of it's like just random stuff like, hey, what's on your adventure bucket list? Or it's, like this month with mental health awareness month is, how do you take care of yourself? What's a song that makes you happy? Things of that nature. But it gives everyone the opportunity to connect, right? So either they're talking on the internet, they're talking on Slack, but then leaders are then bringing that into their meetings, right? So you may, folks who are not on the, sharing it with the entire company, but then we're in a meeting and I start off like, hey, okay, after I check in, I go into, let's talk about, right, like to this month's prompt or this week's prompt, and we start those conversations. And then the other piece I just wanted to add on was the one-on-one piece. I think that's really important. And how do you make them intentional? And sometimes that connection piece doesn't have to be virtually, like, on the computer that we're looking at each other. We do a lot of what we call walk-in talks, where people have an opportunity to get up and get moving, especially as a health and wellness organization. But it's really important to find ways to connect with what's important to that person when you're thinking about belonging. Because if my leader knows, hey, Noel doesn't like one-on-ones at 8 in the morning, we may do them at 3 o'clock, in the afternoon, because that's what energizes and gets me going. But he also knows me enough to know, like, hey, Noel, like, are you cooking right now while we're talking? Like, whatever that is. And I think that's really important too, as you're building those relationships. So how do you ensure that when you're asking someone, how are you doing, you're listening for the answer, right? And get more feedback there. But those are just some additional ways I wanted to add in terms of how do you truly connect in some of these spaces.
No,
Yeah, I
they're
love
good double clicks.
Yeah. Linking to what I think Alex mentioned initially about visual cues and what you're now also talking about, Noel, looking and feeling what the other person is doing. And this happened really to listening with the eyes. How are you reading the temperature in the room? And this happened with this person, Raghu Krishnamurthy, was the ex CHRO at GE. He was talking to one of the managers, and they found out that somebody in their team was really responding at totally different times. He was not picking up the cues. He was speaking when he was not supposed to speak to, and he was also staying quiet when he was addressed for something. And they realized that something was wrong. And that's when his manager listened with her eyes. And after the conversation, one meeting was over, she called him up offline and asked him, hey, what's wrong? Help me understand. You don't seem to be where you should be, and is there something I can do to help you? And she found out that he was on the spectrum, and he was so grateful for that conversation. He said that, it's not very obvious, but I'm really struggling with picking up the normal conversation cues online. And his manager said, okay, I'll figure out a problem I figured out a solution for this problem. Over the next couple of meetings, she instituted a new protocol to say that every time somebody wanted to interrupt, they hold up a pink slip, or if someone had finished talking, they would say Roger. And just like how you do the walkie-talkie kind of a thing. And people found it strange in the beginning, but she explained just that one of the colleagues was having a problem. She didn't name or she didn't point who. She just said one of them is having a problem. Let's also join together to make it work so that no person is left behind. So I think as leaders and as managers, we need to have that ability to listen with our eyes, not just with our ears, especially in situations online, to provide that emotional first aid when it's needed. So I think really picking on what both of you said, this is what really connects to me about online situations, the empathy in the leader to be able to read these cues.
No, some good extra points as well. I might move on to the next question, which is still sort of digging into the same sort of area, and I'll come to Nessa for this one, which is, I guess, how important are the informal virtual interactions, like virtual coffee breaks or just informal conversations, something like when we're in the physical office, it's very easy just to go and sit and have a chit chat. So how do we, how important is that, and how do we sort of tackle doing something similar like that?
Thanks, Rod. So when we went into remote work, I always knew what the word intentional meant, but it takes on a whole new meaning when you're working remotely. So like just something I'm constantly thinking about is when you were in the office as a leader, you could kind of see who went to lunch together. So you sort of saw who were friendly with one another. If you were having a conversation with somebody and sharing what TV show you were watching, somebody would, could join into that. And now the conversations are much more, might be just much more narrowly focused on like having a one-on-one. So I think it's like a leader's job to really connect the dots with people and have moments for people to connect. So whether that's a team meeting, having a moment to talking about TV shows is one of my favorite things to do. So when I started in my current role, a couple of team members shared what they were watching. And then, as a leader, I took it upon myself to go and watch that. And then I think that like, went a long way with the team to know, oh, she saw my suggestion and took it. And I think that was very meaningful for folks. And then just to, remember spouses' names, children's names, understand that like, for example, I'm not a parent, but I understand the cycle of the school year, right? So that I'm always kind of checking in with people and with the knowledge of what's going on in their area. But I do think that those informal interactions just build trust at the end of the day. And that's how we're getting really important work done, is the basis of trust has to be established. And that does come from understanding who the person is and realizing that it's not a one size fits all. It is, understanding what that person needs and meeting them where they are.
Yeah, I think that trust thing is a big thing in this remote world. I've come across, well, in my own team where I work is that we have Skype, and Skype lets you know when someone's away from their computer for so many minutes. And yeah, I've had situations where, I found out, a team member had anxiety that they were going to have lunch and it was going to show they had been away from their computer for half an hour. And that's certainly not something that I've ever really thought too much about. And you certainly don't think about it physically at work. Has anyone else had similar experiences to that at all?
By the way, this panel is making my job very easy. They are answering all the questions. I think one important thing that needs to be clarified. We talk about the leader, but what is the actual job of a leader? Drive the mission, vision, and values, build relationship with the team. So this is what the basic job description of a leader is. But one important key thing is, and the panel would agree, all the leadership courses, the supervision courses, the team management and team building courses are all based around working within the team in the office settings. So this is where, we need to train, we need to mentor people based on the new, the new modern ways of work, which is like the way we are interacting right now. So the communication style changes, the way we talk changes, and we all discuss all these visual cues and taking breaks. So first of all, we need to, train and mentor people. They might be making some sort of mistakes, but they are not used to it. They are not trained for it. So in an organization, I think it's extremely important to first come up with some sort of a training or an informal sessions where you can train or mentor the leaders, the managers, and the supervisors. And then next thing is, there is nothing wrong in being professionally candid with your team. So have coffee, have tea. You can, people say, nice to meet you. So new terms have been coming up. So let's have virtual coffee. So whatever you can do to build good relationship with your team, do it. You can be as candid as possible within the professional way. So you can be creative, but for that you need to have some sort of understanding what to do. So remote work is going to bring in all sort of challenges. You need to get yourself a good course, or if you don't have a good course, reach out to people in the industry who are already doing it, talk to them, and they can give you some good pointers how to do it.
Yeah, some great points. Does anyone else want to share it? Is there any other sort of innovative ways that you've used to help make people feel or team members feel connected and included?
Just want to bring them up.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Now, just want to bring another angle to it. Earlier during the pandemic, there were all these, just for example, team building activities around sending Thai cooking classes being done online, all the ingredients being sent home, or a wine and cheese tasting thing going home, and different kind of thing. Different organizations did some of those. So the packs were reached home. There was something online happening together. Everybody muddled through it, and then you had either a exquisite Thai food or not so exquisite looking, but you didn't have to show anybody. You only had to eat it. So all that happened. And I think some of this is also working across generations. What appeals to a certain generation need not appeal to another generation. So even the check-in process, how we do in with some, and we're definitely seeing this in Asia in terms of people not very open to sharing their emotions easily. So just asking that question can be met with a blank stare even across the screen. So we need to go layers down. And to that point, building trust, having that equation already. So if you already were working in a team pre-remote situation, then it's easier to maintain that trust and connection post-remote. But you also had a lot of new people getting onboarded during the time that you were remote, and they stayed remote. So I think something different needed to be done with them in terms of really building the trust, having, trying to find a way to go on a hike together with them and all that, and within the relevance of the team and the organization. So it's not one thing. There are lots of great ideas about team building. Earlier, everybody would go and build a ship together or do something. That's not one for all. One thing for all is not going to work. So really bringing in different attributes for different generations, what will work for them? Can we make it more fun, more physical, and so on and so forth?
I'm glad you said that. I think that's really important. So my current role, I was hired remote. And I think that's really important to understand because not everyone started that way and had the water cooler talk and then moved to a space where you're on the computer. Like I was hired in this space. So this is how I met my team, right? Just as I'm talking with all of you today. And I think when you talk about trust, it started from the interview process for me, right? To make that connection with my leader and the folks on the panel. And then, we talked about intentionality, but being really intentional in these conversations that we're getting to know each other because we don't have that normal, like, hey, oh, I watched this on TV as, we're walking down the hallway. We don't have that because our hallways are very different. My hallways, my house, my leader, his hallway is his. So that's really important. But it was also about setting expectations in the relationship. And we talk about freedom in a framework. We have our readiness culture code, we have our expectations, but we also make sure that there's freedom where people can show up and be themselves. So like when Rod mentioned, like people scared of being, on Skype and being away from the computer, we're really intentional to say, hey, if you need heads down, focus time, do that because I also, as the leader, can of course see your end result, right? So it's not about making sure Noelle's on, her computer at 7 a.m. and then clocking off at this time. It's about, is the work getting done, right? In a way that's helping move the organization forward. Is Noelle helping lead her team, that they're meeting their expectations and goals. So I just want to make sure we also talk about like accountability, because I think that's really important. It's all great to have fun and the food and cheese, wine and cheese boards and things of that nature. But some places that's not reality. So I think it's really important to say, like, how do you still set expectations, expect results, right? Set goals, have accountability when this is your normal. There may not have been a normal before that. This is the person's normal, like I said, because this has been my normal for 2.5 years with my team. Like, yes, we've gone to meetings and things of that nature in that time, but it was a while before I got to meet people in person. So I think we have to be mindful of that as people are listening in, because their organizations may be similar. So just something to pose to the group.
No, that's a really good addition. Sorry.
Hey, Rod, I wanted to add on to what Noelle said, because one thing that we do at my company today is we do something called an introduction exercise. It is a document that's meant for the manager to fill out and the employee, and it's the same kind of questions, but it's included in the new hire packet, and we encourage it whenever somebody has a new person joining their team. And it's very it's very intentional. It is, how do you prefer to learn? How do you like to receive feedback? What motivates you? What's important about you that we didn't talk about during the interview process that I need to know? And hopefully that's a catch-all for that. But I do agree with the Noelle on the accountability part. We have to, it's very difficult, I think, for managers to switch from, I see that you're working at your desk, to I don't see you every day, and have to think about things in terms of the output instead of just what you can see. That's been a tough shift for a lot of leaders, and it's okay. Let's just admit that and then start to think along a new paradigm.
Yeah, thanks.
We had a very...
Lisa.
Yeah. So, do you want to carry on, Rod? Yeah.
Yes, I'm going to say sort of going into this generational aspect that you shared before. I just what really fascinates me, or what troubles me as well, is that we've got new generations who have just like finished uni, coming into a workplace that traditionally was very much in person. Is how do we bring them? What do we specifically do for, I think they're Generation Z, I think, but the people of just newly starting the workforce, and sometimes going into a mature organization where the professionals now might be more working remotely. How do we bring them into the organization? How do we mentor them? Because a lot of learning isn't just by doing classroom learning, as most people, I'm sure, on this listening to this would have experience with. So how do we generate that belonging and that development to really bring those individuals into the organization? So I was going to give you a go at this one, Nessa, if you want to
I'll just quickly say something and then turn it over to our other panelists. But look, Gen Z does not, if they did not come into the workplace, they do not know nuances as specific as, how, even things like how to set up a conference room for a client, or, virtually, and how to sort of like kind of present yourself. And, it's just like, there's so many nuances that are lost or not known because they just simply could not see an example in front of them to know what to follow, to what to emulate. So if it's possible for folks to come into the office, if they have that ability, just so that they get those key learning moments, I think that that's great. If not, again, I just go back to be very explicit. I think the job of a leader is to make sure somebody is successful. I often see leaders say, I'm going to see how they rise to the occasion or fail. And I'm of the other camp, which is, let's set them up for success. Let me make sure that everything's super clear for them, so that they can be successful, and that success will lead to more motivation for them and success. So I'll turn it over to others.
Yeah, I might just add a little bit in between too, is that my experience was, we hired a whole lot of we hired maybe 15 graduates, and what we found was that they all came into the office every day. Like, they came in and they were in a pod together, but just together, and it was very hard to then get that experience to bleed in and to be available for them. But they were definitely seeking that. So that's sort of what is in my mind when I'm asking this question as well. Anyone else want to share this?
I want to really give the benefit of doubt and the support to the generation that's coming in. They're not coming in necessarily at the best of times. It's not the worst of times, but it's not the best of times either. I think especially in organizations, the senior executive team also needs to really realize there is a lot to be learned the other way around as well. And I've seen shadow boards work really well, remote or otherwise, because I think the comfort with remote is very high with the generation that's coming in. So without projecting our own feelings towards it, I remember at Movenpick Hotel, the senior executive team was discussing the need to create an booking app for over a year. And all of the competitors had an app and all that. So they said, oh, that's a no brainer. We need to develop an app and roll it out. And the IT department was conducting feasibility studies, and they were almost ready to launch it till they decide to pass it by the shadow board. And they said, oh my God, why would you guys waste your time developing another app? Nobody's going to create a username. Nobody's going to create a password. Another one, no way, not working. Why don't you create a web interface instead? And they listened. The executive team listened. Instead of wasting all that money on creating that app, they actually created a web interface which took off the booking business for them immensely. So I think providing opportunities, they work very well. And I'm generalizing to make a point. The group really works very well remote. They work very well online. Trusting them, setting that. I love the freedom within the framework always, and we use it for AI as well today in terms of how we are looking at process. And I think the same thing works for people in some ways. So really setting those frameworks, but giving them, including them in decisions, listening to their voices, and making, really setting them up for success, to quote Nessa back.
Thanks. Now, welcome to Noel. I'm just wondering, what are some strategies for learning and development in this sort of remote hybrid world? If we're just looking at, again, just now developing others and developing ourselves.
Yeah. Some work that I've been able to do is I'm trying to meet people where they are, right? So if I'm spending 6 hours in front of a computer, I may not want to spend another, 2-3 hours in front of a computer doing a training as well. So I think that's really important to understand. It just depends on what it is. So I lead learning and inclusion at my organization. So like some work when it comes to unconscious bias, it may be right in front of the computer. It needs to be a little bit longer, but we're intentional in ensuring that we have breakout groups that are really important to have conversation. So yes, let's say a session, maybe an hour and a half, but we're probably spending at least 50 minutes of that time in breakouts where people are talking, so they don't feel like they're being, taught at, right? Like in terms of a training standpoint. Some of it's micro learning, those, 10 to 15 minute where someone can hop on and they can learn at their leisure, I think is really important. How do you also even create like really impactful one pagers, right? Sometimes, everyone likes to learn differently. Some people need to, read, they need to listen, they need to be hands-on. And then of course, when we have an opportunity to be hands-on, whether it's someone's teaching a class or coming in, there are groups from different client bases are all coming in and learning together. So I think that's another important. It's not always saying, hey, learning with your team, with marketing or with this group or with that group. It's saying, let's get people of different roles to get into a room because they're getting a different experience, right? If this is always my team, then it just feels like another team meeting. No, let's get some new folks in here so that we can get some new ideas and different points of view. So again, for me, it's starting with meeting them where they're at. If they're spending all their time in front of the computer, another 3 hours isn't going to be really impactful because it's just going to feel like a drainer. But how do we do, like I said, micro learnings, one pagers? And then when we are going to meet virtually, how do we make sure it's really poignant conversation in terms of discussions?
Anyone else got anything to share about learning and development, their experiences?
I was just going to, I think the pick up Noel's point on unconscious bias. I think one of the things that we learned was to go back to basics. There's a Mike, I think on the chat was mentioning, sort of what would you do for remote leaders that's the same or different for in terms of training. We push back to management 101. I think it can, when you have that sort of almost organic connections in an office, things like one-on-ones, hi, how are you, water cooler, etc. are just, they come. When it's not there, you have to be far more over the top, and that's what I was referring to at the top of the call with regards to being extremely planned as a leader and managing people through that. One of the other points that we found as we moved into COVID is that we have Microsoft Teams through our office in the suite, and no one knew how to use it. So when people would just, they knew how to log on, they knew how to have a meeting, but that was it. They didn't know anything about breakout rooms, whiteboards, or any of the other collaboration or connection tools. And so that was an absolute game changer, where we got someone in quite quickly, because we couldn't understand. People weren't using their diary, for example, and telling anyone where they were. They didn't realize Outlook talked to Teams. It was really strange, but of course, why would they? And particularly if you look at the different age groups, where people who weren't brought up on computers might not be that first place that they look for to make their job or day easier, when somebody of a younger generation might. Then flipping that, sitting on the edge of a bed and somebody actually having that conversation to say that's not really cool. Firstly, it's not very safe to sit like that all day, but also there's a professional etiquette here that someone probably hasn't told you. So it's exploring those with regards to what your expectations are, and making sure that unconscious bias is at the front of everybody's minds in terms of that training, to say, don't make assumptions. You don't know where people are at. We're thrust into people's bedrooms. There may be 6 flatmates they're trying to escape from, but you as a leader, it's your responsibility to ask those questions and understand what their environment is.
No, so true. Now, there's been a number of comments made about a document that Nessa mentioned. So we'll make sure we can put a copy of that in the comments. So make sure you look back there. Might get up there after the actual meeting's done, but we'll have the document there. Now, next question would be how to best navigate bridging in this hybrid world. How do we sort of bridge where we have people in the office and we've got people virtually? A challenge I've seen is when you're running a workshop and you've got this sort of mixed hybrid world. So what are some thoughts along there? And Cahill, I'll start with you.
I think this is where the challenge lies. Remote work, you know, there are people remote, you design your policies, your strategies accordingly. But when it comes to hybrid work, this is where, you know, the confusion and your real skill set is being tested. I think what my experience says, the major issues that the leaders and the managers face when it comes to the performance management. So the performance is usually designed differently for people working in a remote setting. Their compen band system is different. The way they are evaluated is different. But for hybrid work, it becomes sort of a, you know, tricky thing. I think before going into the details, it's extremely important for the organization and the leaders to have clarity themselves why they are doing it. So the overall mission and vision needs to be clear when it comes to the hybrid workforce and the diversity and inclusion, everything involved, like why the organization is doing it. And that needs to be clarified to the employees as well. So if there is a policy or there is a performance management system or there are certain expectations, it first needs to be clarified across the level. So everyone is on the same page. The next thing is what leaders are trying to do in this, you know, complex situation. They are trying to come up with complex formulas and complex scenarios, trying to understand things. Make it simple. The simpler it is, the easier it is going to be at the strategy level as well as for the execution level. So sometimes, you know, simplifying things can bring in better results. It's more of a theoretical discussion, but when it comes to the practical side, keeping it simple. I don't want to use the word profiling because some of the organizations are using it, but profiling, you know, making sure that you have the sort of the groups ready. So let's suppose Generation Z, what sort of profile is there? What are their needs and how we should, you know, motivate them? So some would be after innovation, some would require some sort of an empathy role, or some people would require, money, whatever it is. So creating subgroups, and then using the emotional intelligence, building emotional intelligence for leaders, like where what needs to be done. And the last thing is, people analytics can bring in wonders. If you are bringing in the technology, utilize the data analytics. Data can give you very good insights when it comes to decision making for a hybrid workforce.
Thanks. Anyone want to add any more to that particular
I have
question?
a very small, like micro tip for people, and I learned it way before the pandemic, is that when you're in a room and you have people dialing in, or, it's somehow hard to like recognize that they're in the room, is to actually write their names on a board, like if there's a whiteboard there. And it's just another way for you to kind of have them represented in some way. I think now that the technology for remote work is more sophisticated, you can see their name up on a screen perhaps, but if there's anybody dialing in, I would just recommend that you find some kind of visual way to have them represented in the room, even if it's just their name on a whiteboard.
That's a very good tip. And to add on another tip, like from my experiences, is having a computer that's facing the whiteboard, so that sometimes in the meeting you want to actually use the whiteboard. So it's how do you bring that to the group that's virtual? It's very easy for them to miss out. So that's like my little extra tip onto that would be, you have a camera facing to the actual whiteboard, to add on to that. All right, we've only got 5 official minutes left. That's crazy. I've got two questions, so it's going to be, we'll just go to one at a time. But I guess just very quickly, what about trends? What do we as a group think that's going to happen? In the next, I guess we can't think too far ahead, but in the next maybe 5 years, which is probably a long way ahead. What do you foresee for remote and hybrid work? Any ideas or suggestions or expectations?
I'll start. I think
Yeah.
in where we are in New Zealand, I think that we're probably pendulum swinging at the moment. We're in a position where we're bringing everyone back to the office at least 3 days a week, sometimes 4. I think that once it's sort of cyclical, then we'll start worrying about a talent crisis. Now, we're quite a small country, and so not everybody's going to be coming to Auckland. There's only 1 million people to choose from, but there's 5 million in the country. So I think we will swing the other way and get better at performance management, get better at those courageous conversations, and start thinking about productivity a little bit more, probably a bit more differently, but more output focus. I think, as Noelle was saying, people should know what you're looking for. What did you all agree to? What did you sign up for?
Yeah. Thanks, Alex. Anyone else wish to share?
I just want to add one thing. I had discussion with Robert Mosley, one of the top future of work experts in the world. And he predicted that in the coming 4 or 5 or maybe hardly 10 years, people are going to work on project basis. So there will be less dependency on the job descriptions, and people would be required to, work whatever is required. So that requires extremely effective communication and great leadership skills. So unless and until you have a very good upskilling and reskilling mechanism within your organization, you have good working remote teams with the concepts of BPO, rising throughout the world, especially in the IT sector. I think it's important to have good strategy in place when it comes to skilling and reskilling and effective leadership development.
Yep. Very true.
I just want to add on about really leaders' responsibility about looking at marginalized communities, and in some cases women as well, especially working in creative industries or working asynchronously. Sometimes we think that working synchronously is better for creativity. There are benefits for ideation, and synchronized work is great, but sometimes synchronous work is actually stifling creativity. And they did this research with men and women baul folk musicians, baul. They're a particular kind of musicians who walk the streets and sing and create stories. And when they did that, they found that for women especially, working asynchronously meant better, greater creative freedom for them. And their voice was heard, their ideas were heard. There was, whereas there was no variation to the men musicians in that research that they did. While it is very focused on a specific community and for purpose, I think creating those safe communication climates is really important when we are looking at hybrid, remote, and all that. And keeping in mind some of the underrepresented groups, how are their voices going to be heard, be it in meetings, be it in remote situations, be it in hybrid situations? I think really looking at that is going to be pretty critical for leaders creating that level playing field in the future work as you go along. How do you listen to every voice, the cognitive diversity that could bring, so that it's not missed?
No, that's a really important point. And different people also, like to get questions differently. Like, I mean, in my own household, my son, he likes to get his questions at school written out to him. Like he has difficulty just dealing with it face to face at times. All right, it's 1 o'clock. 1 o'clock my time. So we'll come to the end, which has just been way too quick. I'd like to thank the panelists for sharing such valuable insights and their experiences today. I think what we've heard is that it's really critical. Creating belonging and inclusion in remote workplaces really requires intentionality, empathy, and a continual effort to do that. So thank you everyone again today, the audience as well, for joining us. Look forward to continuing these important conversations and being part of future panels and seeing you there. So thank you everybody today. So thanks.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you.